Everyone, I'm Rebecca Slayton. I'm the director of the Judith Reppy Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies, jointly appointed in the Department of Science and Technology Studies here at Cornell. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies and also the Brooks Tech Policy Institute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on Cornell University's campus, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Gaia-Kahono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gaia-Kahono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gaia-Kahono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gaia-Kahono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. And now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Herbert Lin is a senior research scholar at Stanford University Center for International Security and Cooperation and a research fellow at the Hoover Institution, also at Stanford. His work focuses on the national security impact of emerging technologies, especially digital technologies such as cyber, artificial intelligence, and influence operations. Before he went to Stanford, he had a very distinguished career as the chief scientist for the Computer Science and Telecommunications Board of the National Research Council in Washington, D.C., leading key studies on public policy and information technology from 1990 to 2014. And about 5 years before that, he was a postdoctoral scholar here at Cornell in the Reppy Institute, where he did some very influential work analyzing the problem of software for missile defense, Strategic Defense Initiative. And I actually first met Herb about 24 years ago when I started studying that whole debate about the software for missile defense. So today I'm grateful to be able to count him as a wonderful friend, a colleague, and a mentor. And welcome back.
Thank you. So, if I have to be honest, it's a little bit, it certainly brings back memories to be back in this room. My office was one flight up, right across from this conference room upstairs in yours on the first floor. And I want to acknowledge intellectual debts to Judith, who invited me, who first invited me to be a part of peace studies, and who really launched my career doing anything serious about national security. And also Fred Schneider back there, who is from the computer science department, who has tutored me in many ways about many aspects of computer reliability and safety and so on. And of course, all of that stuff is absolutely central to what I'm going to talk about now. So, in fairness, it's a little bit intimidating. Let's proceed anyway.
Could you speak a bit louder?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let me try.
Louder.
Yes, I will try. Let's see.
And there is space at the table if people want to come up. Be more careful.
Here's the clip.
All right.
Okay, so. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So what's not on the table today? Okay, there's a long list of things that are not on the table, including the questions that some of the questions that Rebecca raised in saying that these are more interesting questions to talk about. I can talk about all of these things, and eventually I will. I hope to have a whole set of talks on all of this stuff. This is in fact one of my research projects, thinking about how AI and nuclear weapons intersect with each other. Not going to talk about when bad guys use AI. That's a big deal, right? How could they use AI to compromise our nuclear forces? When our allies use AI, arms control for AI or AI's impact on arms control. Those are very interesting questions. Not going to talk any about that. What does it mean to be in an arms race for nuclear for AI? I'm only going to talk about the operational risk of AI when we use it ourselves. And that's the limited focus of my talk. Okay. I'm not going to talk about it when AI. You think about AI in adjacent domains, like in conventional forces, or in anti-satellite warfare, or in ballistic missile defense. Those are also very important questions. I'm not going to point out that AI is affected by doctrine and force structure, not just the technology, right? The risks that you have from AI depend on what kind of force structure you're trying to control. For example, you might worry about accidental launch of ICBMs with AI. Okay, perfectly reasonable question to come up. But if you don't have any ICBMs, that's not an issue, right? So you could choose to have a nuclear force that doesn't have any ICBMs and thereby eliminate that risk. Okay, so just an example of how force structure and force structure affects the risks that you might have with AI. This is the first known nuclear command and control directive. It's the orders to bomb Hiroshima. That's a photocopy of the orders. Here's a transcript of it in visible. Imagine that somebody was typing this on Microsoft Word, right? And there was that misspelling, right? We all made that mistake. And so just imagine that. And should we be using spell check? I think nobody would argue about using spell check. But of course, spell check is an AI function. So nobody complains about using AI in the form of spell check for nuclear command and control. Nobody worries about that. I'd say that's kind of a benign use. Now here's another idea. Let's give ChatGPT the launch codes. Anybody here think that's a good idea? Good. No hands go up. Very good. Okay. It's really a bad idea. You don't want to do that. So between these two extremes, they're clearly ridiculous versus, okay, fine, no big deal. There's a big range. And to understand the impact of AI, you need to get some detail. What does it mean? And so what I want to do in this talk is provide a way of talking about what you mean by AI and what you mean by the nuclear enterprise. I think this is my.
Take that one seriously.
Okay. So the intellectually hard issues are concealed in the definitions. AI in the nuclear enterprise, much broader than just AI and the launch decision. I think that's the thing that I want to underscore. The bottom line up front, many applications of AI either to the nuclear enterprise are either benign or enhance human control. And there's a narrow set that have to be avoided at all costs. And the hard part is distinguishing, taking for any given application of AI, which category you want to put it in. That's the hard part. And that's actually an extended research agenda. Real quick on AI, everything you wanted to know about AI, it's really, the important stuff is just up in the right-hand corner, okay? I have a lot of buzzwords up there about the history and more buzzwords down here about words that you might have heard. None of them matter for this talk. I just put them up there so that if you have some background, you know that those things have come up in the discussion of AI. Most important thing here is that machine learning in the upper right, use of large amounts of data to enable computers to perform tasks without explicit instructions. They generalize, they quote, learn from patterns in data with minimal human intervention. That's the idea, that's the fundamental idea behind machine learning. Throw a lot of data at it and you get patterns out. And everything else is a variation on that. Remember these points about AI, machine learning, in the machine learning form. It's still a way of programming computers. What's going on inside is incomprehensible to humans. Conventional programming, you have to actually, write an instruction and another instruction and another instruction. You're actually coding what the machine does. As a machine learning system operates, numbers change, but you have no idea what the changes in those numbers mean. Machine learning as at heart, it's statistics. You all know from statistics 101, correlation is not causation. What that means is that you can't ever get a causal explanation out of a pure out of a pure machine learning system. Better to think of machine learning as statistical rather than smart. This also means that garbage in, garbage out still holds, right? Bad data in, you get bad data out. No way around that. And AI doesn't let you violate the laws of physics. It doesn't create new facts where none existed before. It gives you more insight, and that's good. That's a useful thing to do, but it doesn't create any new facts for you. And it can't address unknown unknowns any better than people can. The nuclear enterprise, maybe a little bit more familiar to people in this room. Three components that are worth thinking about. The nuclear weapons program, that's the things that go boom. The design, certification, all that sort of stuff about the actual thing that goes boom. The delivery systems of platforms, those are the missiles, the submarines that carry the missiles, the bombers, the cruise missiles, and all that sort of stuff. And the nuclear command and control system. There's a nuclear command and control system that thinks that there's the people, processes, and policies for controlling nuclear weapons. And then NC3 is it includes the communications and computing infrastructure to come, to actually let people do all of that. Because you have different function in command and control, you have different ways of using AI. I proposed 5 principles for responsible application of AI in a nuclear weapons context in an article that I circulated earlier. I'm going to assume that you haven't read it, but the quickie is, first, humans are still the most essential. You can't, I already talked about AI's risks and benefits can't be addressed separately from the nuclear posture. I'm skeptical about international agreements. We could get into an argument, a discussion about that. Nations can mitigate the risks from their own AI use in nuclear context. That's really what I want to talk about in this talk. This last thing is AI can enhance human control under some circumstances. Mostly I'm going to focus on number 4. Remember, why do you use computers at all in military systems? To improve the efficiency, effectiveness of people that otherwise you get people to do. Computers are everywhere in the nuclear enterprise. AI can be used anywhere. Computers can be used. That means AI is potentially applicable everywhere in the nuclear enterprise. Not a surprise. I don't think that's surprising. There's no reason to expect that AI will improve every application. If you don't doubt that, go to your nearest Play Store and look for AI applications of palmistry. Palm reading, right? I submit to you that AI applications there do not improve the output of palm reading, okay? And there's, of course, a long story of military software that's not actually an improvement. No reason to expect that AI is going to be exempt from any of this. This is an illustrative drill down of what you mean when you talk of how, when I say you got more detail, you need more detail. You've got to drill down pretty deep to make sense out of this. This hierarchy of functions is contained within the DoD definition of nuclear command and control. DoD separates nuclear command and control into 5 functions: force management, situation monitoring, planning, decision-making, and force direction. And there's some words there that give you some sort of idea of what it's supposed to be. A drill down on that looks something like this. For example, force management. This involves control of your nuclear forces. You got to think about personnel reliability, what your own forces are doing, and analyze data from drills and so on. Those are some of the things. It's not obviously not all. It's just a sampling of the things that you have to do. Situation monitoring. What's going on around the world? What are red forces doing? What are what's going on in the world, and what other leaders said, and so on. Is there a missile attack that's happening right now? That's tactical warning. You have to worry data interoperability. What does that mean? That means you have sensors that were made by vendor A and vendor B, and they have to talk to each other so you can get all the information in. You have to integrate the data. The interoperability question is a critical one technically. Sometimes you get machines to translate from one system to another. Sometimes you do fat fingering. You have a person here who's looking at a screen over there and it's fat fingering the data into a new system. This happens all the time within DoD. Planning. You have to update, develop and update operational plans. Many things go into planning. You might have to decide what route to take to a target and do the most fuel efficient route. But you have to avoid the defenses. And you have to plan it so that when you get to where there is a surface to air missile battery over there, that battery has been destroyed and not, before you get there, not after you've flown past it. Got to do all that sort of stuff. You might want to think about artificial intelligence, for example, or to use real lawyers to decide whether a certain threat complies with the laws of war. Okay, that's something that you have to do in planning. Might think about what you would do to launch a conventional attack on adversary nuclear forces. Not nuclear at all. Decision making is another category. This is assessment, review, consultation. The people at the top have to talk to people, other people to figure out what they want to do, what the various considerations are, and so on. They have to understand an adversary intent. They want to understand how the bad guys, the adversaries, think about our intent and so on. We might want to generate new courses of action, COAs, in real time as things are unfolding. Force direction. That means that once the president decides what he wants to do, you have to order the forces to do it. And that takes a lot of work. And we have a whole communications infrastructure devoted to that. You have to know that you sent out an order. You have to know that they've received it. You have to see that they're actually doing things in response to it and so on. You have to confirm all that sort of stuff. You have to go into real detail. But even this isn't enough. This is an example of just as an example of how far you might want to go. Situation monitoring, there's this tactical warning attack assessment function. It includes surveillance of looking around for ballistic missiles. The definition includes processing of data. You have to go pretty far down before you get to something like onboard processing of signals from the radars and from the infrared satellites. Okay. That's a sufficiently concrete function that I can say, let's put AI to use, computers to use on that. And now I can make an assessment here. All those other things are other things that you would have to do. So a comparable drill down of these goes under here and under here and under here. And so I'm not going to do it. But when I say you have to do a very thorough drill down, that's what you need to do. Here are some of the benefits you might get out of using AI. I separate them into what I'm going to call transformational, useful, and nominal, marginally beneficial. On the transformational, you can use this stuff to integrate large volumes of very different information. This is sort of like what you think a large language model does. A very heterogeneous data. Maybe it's going to be useful in force management. The United States Armed Forces are very, very large entities. There's lots of people and machines and stuff doing things all over the world. And understanding what's going on for the people at the top is really hard. Famous example during the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, is one where we stood down forces to not provoke the Soviet Union, and we forgot, somebody forgot, that there was a reconnaissance flight over the Soviet Union to collect air samples. And it was discovered, and the Russians scrambled fighters to intercept it. We scrambled fighters to protect our U-2 plane, our fighters were equipped with nuclear air missiles. This was, and this was a complete, McNamara at the time when he heard about this was completely, he turned white. It was this, geez, a real big trouble. Fortunately, nothing happened. But just an example of, we didn't know to actually turn that off. So it's hard. So it could be that you use AI to keep track of what your forces are doing, and you ask the system, are we doing anything right now that the adversary might misinterpret? You could ask that kind of question. It's obviously much more complicated than that, but I hope you get the idea. Useful. Incremental benefits in stockpile stewardship. For example, you might be able to improve the yield to weight ratio of a nuclear weapon, or to use a better insensitive high energy explosive. Anybody who wants these PowerPoints, I'm happy to give them to, by the way. Probably you don't get much transformation on it. It might be modestly, we get a little bit better data on aging and so on. Nominally, beneficial, reduce the time from emergency action message when you press a button and the emergency message goes out to launch. That's pretty quick right now already. Not going to help very much. The attack warning, attack assessment, tactical warning, that's the timelines there are constrained by physics. You won't get more than half an hour of warning. Whether or not you need overhead imagery to decide whether or not something's been destroyed, well, you probably don't need a photograph, because a nuclear weapon has the advantage that if you know where it goes off, you know the weapons physics pretty well, so you know what's going to be destroyed around it and so on. AI is not going to give you good confidence in assessments of adversary intent. And it also introduces additional sources of error. On AI safety, there's a lot of research devoted to making AI behave as intended, working with, that is under human control and doesn't cause unacceptable harm. Lots of technical research approaches. I don't do any of that stuff. It's important work. A lot of people do it. I support they're doing it. It's really, really important stuff. This is making the AI better. There are, however, fundamental challenges to it. And nobody in the field believes that you're going to eliminate the risks from AI. You can only reduce them and manage the risk. So I'm at that space, I'm in that space. Sorry. I'm in that space where AI risks have been mitigated as much as you can go with all of the technical stuff. But after that, how do you manage the risk? The residual risk from there. And that's what, when AI safety isn't enough. I have 6 criteria. Can't remember, maybe this one I have 7, but when the stakes are low, right? So if the stakes are low, it doesn't matter very much whether it's reliable and safe and so on. Predictive maintenance for AI. That's in using AI to figure out to predict when a part is going to break and replace it just before it breaks. This is an important thing to do. You have to do this constantly with systems that, and AI is very well suited for that. If it fails, you have the consequence that you might replace the part too soon. So what? Maybe the dying part isn't flagged, and you have to replace it because it died. That's what they do now anyway. Neither failure is particularly significant in the big scheme of things. If this is true, you gain experience here. So this is, if the stakes are relatively low, and often the stakes are relatively low, it's okay. When the use case has a commercial analog, this is really important here because if the commercial people are doing it, you can learn from them. They can learn from you. You're not doing it de novo. The commercial sector will probably have metrics for use that you didn't have. And you can leverage their R&D to help you. So by definition, if you share, you can be part of their community. But of course, there are some unique military applications. There's no application in the nuclear, in the commercial sector for nuclear planning, for nuclear targeting. And so you just don't, you don't do that. But there are places where it's okay. Civilian and military logistics are a big deal. The similarities there are really quite common. They both require in-transit visibility. You need to know when something's going to arrive. You sometimes need to replan that a shipment was going there, it needs to go over there, and so on. All sorts of stuff that the military and civilians both have to do. So there are many examples of similar applications in military and civilian. And my own personal view is that I think this is going to be the most important place where AI is going to make a big difference. It's unambiguously good. When the use case involves provides adequate time to review the output, human review of AI output. Consider the difference between real-time applications and operations, having a AI computer control a system in real time versus something that's being done in batch, where you just put it in and whenever it comes out, it comes out. Much more stressful in the first case than in the second case. If you have adequate time, doesn't mean you're going to use it, but it's better to have the time anyway. It's only one component of meaningful human control. But this isn't necessarily a call for meaningful human control. We can talk about that later if you like. And the absence of adequate time is not necessarily disqualifying, just increases the risk. For example, consider the difference between AI for pre-planned target selection for a nuclear targeting plan that sits in a safe and one that you're doing it in real time where you have to make a decision as to what to hit in the next 20 minutes. The second is a lot more risky than the first. Fourth condition is when ground truth exists for being able to judge output. Ground truth is a precondition for having reliable verification. Imagine a God's eye view, which is there's a camera and a microphone everywhere in the world that you want to see. You can know what's actually going on. You can't necessarily infer intent because you can't put a sensor in the guy's head, but you can see. So lower risk cases, image classification. You can classify an image as to whether or not it's a dog or a cat or something. You could, there is something captured that image, and you could in principle be there and see it. In a military context, blue force awareness, okay? Where are your forces and what are they doing now? It's also red force awareness. In principle, you could know that too. That's harder. It's higher risk of blue force awareness because the data is harder to get, but it's still the same spirit. But you can't get ground truth in a lot of other cases. For example, if you want to talk about scenario generation is limited by your imagination and your judgments about the plausibility of something. No idea whether it's quote plausible or quote implausible on the basis of any objective ground truth. Okay. Sentiment analysis. Language is ambiguous. How do you tell when somebody is being sarcastic? Intent assessment. How can you tell what their motives are? Examples of high risk. Can you tell whether something is an exercise or preparation for a sneak attack? Able Archer 83. When you see a fuel truck next to a missile, you can report it as the missile is being fueled or the missile is being prepared for launch. Those have entirely different connotations. They might mean the same thing. And this in principle part about when I say that ground truth exists in principle for judging the AI's output means that a principle. I want you to distinguish between in principle availability of truth, that the correct answer exists objectively, even if it's hard to access, and practical inaccessibility. That is, you can't, like, I know it exists, but I can't, there's no way to get at that. And you have to contrast that with if there's no truth at all. Those are different cases. When the AI case allows for separation from the AI, the AI separating the AI from the non-AI functionality. If the AI goes going crazy, you want to be able to turn off the AI and still use the system. You don't want to be stuck with an AI that's crazy and you just got to use it. This principle has to also apply to any specific application that integrates AI. Remember, you may know about Project Maven. Project Maven is a program within DoD to identify targets and so on, turns huge volumes of sensor information into actionable targeting intelligence. If you find that it's going crazy, you can stop using it. You don't have to rely on it, and you'll be less efficient. You'll still be able to function. Where am I worried most about this? Well, even if I put AI only in the conventional forces and don't touch the nuclear forces at all, there is this thing called JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. This is the DoD vision for connecting everything in the conventional forces, every sensor to every shooter. And in principle, you get information from any sensor about where a target is, and you pass it to the right, you pass it into the network, and the network decides what weapon is best suited to a packet. And you allocate that weapon to that particular target. That's the idea behind JADC2. DoD will tell you that AI is an essential part of this. True enough, it is. They can't do this without AI. But they will also tell you that nuclear command and control is being integrated with JADC2. That is, because we have a warfighting doctrine that wants to have a seamless flow between nuclear and conventional. Let you decide on the merits of that. But it's clear in that case that things that happen with AI in the conventional world might start having some effects in the nuclear world, if you believe in that kind of coupling. Even if you never put AI into the nuclear forces. And we want to be able to separate out, by my principle, the AI functionality. That means you want to be able to break the link between JADC2 and nuclear command and control. Not going to happen. I suspect not. But that would be the implication of what I'm proposing. You want to be able to recognize catastrophic failure. When your AI is going crazy, what does that mean? How do you know? Detection is needed for intervention, and you want to be able to put in some mechanism later on to mitigate it, but first you have to be able to detect the failure. A good example of this is in 1988, the USS Vincennes, which was an Aegis destroyer, shoots down an Iranian airliner. 300 people died. Why? Because it was mistaken as a Iranian F-14. They said it's coming down, it's descending rather than ascending. It ultimately traced a lousy user interface. But the point here is that this catastrophe was instantly recognizable. They knew that this was a problem very, very quickly. Versus a hard to detect failure when you don't know it's not working. I'm making this up, okay? Project Silent Horizon. Okay. It's intended to find reload sites for mobile missile launchers, that they hide them in urban industrial areas. Okay. And we use AI to find them. And AI confuses legitimate civilian facilities for military targets. And so you increase the collateral damage. And of course, what happens here is that the early successes, because it doesn't work 1 in 10 times. They won't deploy it if it works 1 in 10 times, but it works, 8 in 10 times. The first few, they all work, and that gives you, oh, this thing works. So it gives them more confidence. And the damage is regarded as expected collateral damage. And so only over time will it become obvious that this thing isn't working as intended. This is an example of where failure is hard to detect. And then the last part is that you have to have a way of mitigating the worst case failures. Okay? There's a famous case, I think, Fred, you're the one who introduced me to this, about an X-ray machine, a cancer therapy machine, radiation therapy machine, that killed several people, which was the Therac 25. The Therac 25 had only software safety mechanisms built into it. The Therac 20 had hardware safety mechanisms in it that physically prevented the high intensity, that is the deadly beam, from being fired when the safety mechanisms were in place. Okay. You couldn't operate the machine because of a hardware interlock. It was impossible. Whereas in the Therac 25 case, the system, there was a software failure in the system, and the system just zaps a button. If you go to an industrial factory where you have robots, they often put cages around the robot arms. This is a good thing, right? You want the cage to protect people. You can also imagine having, the arm goes back and forth. You can imagine having big, heavy metal blocks there so that it can't go outside the arm. That kind of thing. Keeps people away, out of harm's way. Doesn't matter what the machine is doing. It won't kill people if they stay outside the cage. Or military examples. We test our ICBMs. We take them out of a silo, bring them to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and we fire them. But we always modify them in one way. We put in a range safety officer and with a self-destruct mechanism. And if it goes off course or something bad happens, it's completely independent. The range safety officer can do a self-destruct on the missile. At that point, it's a test. Now, we don't have those in the missile silos, right? Because you worry that the Russians might be able to turn off the missiles as we send them off. But if we did have them in the silos, you could see that would be a less dangerous system than if we didn't have them. Again, testing as a protection against accidental launch. On environmental sensing, on nuclear weapons, if it's a gravity bomb, which drops in free fall, it won't explode unless the sensors inside have detected it in free fall. That's a good safety mechanism. That means you can't just, take it and, put it into a truck and bring it into a city. In a fighter plane, in a fighter pilot's cockpit, you often have to manually flip a switch that will enable you to complete the firing circuit for a missile. If you don't throw that, no matter what you do, you can't fire the missile. The presence of one or more of these factors in 1 through 7 reduces the risk of AI. Doesn't eliminate it, but it reduces it. And this checklist is intended to start a discussion, not to end it. And so my point here is that you have to drill down and ascertain whether or not those conditions are met. Here's a straw man assessment for nuclear command and control. And I've cheated here. Because what I've done is I've taken the 5 different categories of NC2 functions and asked myself, are any of these, what of these conditions are true? And then I just count up the yeses. This is a cheat, okay? I haven't done the analysis. And your mileage may vary if you do this. Okay? But if I do this, I sort of come up with, force management, there's sort of 6 yeses, and situation monitoring, there are 4 yeses, and planning, there's 5 yeses, and decision making, there's only 1 yes. And force directions, there's 2. So this, I'm glad it comes out this way because it comports with my intuition, right? Right? If it didn't comport with my intuition, I'd be in trouble, right? But what this more or less tells me is that for force management, most applications of AI are okay. And for decision making, I'm really going to be careful about that. Okay. And for planning and for situation monitoring, yeah, that's okay. And so on. So that's the conclusion. Now, who should pay attention to this? I claim it's policymakers. But it's also most important. Then this is actually a new point here that wasn't in the paper that I had to read. This is people who do acquisition want to pay attention to it. Why them? Because it's the people who do acquisition that make the decisions about whether or not a system is actually going to have AI in it. It's not the general, it's not the Secretary of Defense, it's the colonel who's in charge of the program. So this is one slide about the acquisition process. It's very complicated. It basically says that there's a requirements for a military system that you buy that comes out of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, say. They give you operational criteria. They don't say use AI. They say, I want the system to do X. Okay. For example, the system has to generate a deconflicted 4-dimensional flight route for 100 aircraft within 30 minutes. It says that. And now the program manager sends it out to the commercial world, and commercial vendors respond with proposals. And of course, people now are going to say, well, because AI is de rigueur, everybody is going to say, here's my AI system for doing this. And so what the program manager has to do is select which of those is best. And I'm saying, my point is that they ought to be using the criteria that I described as one element of their decision-making process. That's the job of what's called the source selection team. They're subject matter experts, they're contracting officers, they're people who know something about them. They all get together and they argue about it. This is the actual locus of the actual decision to insert AI. And that's the point. And so, as an example of how the guys at the bottom or in the middle affect the guys, can subvert decisions that come down from the top, you can't do any better than Bruce Blair's example of 8 zeros. So you know this example, okay? McNamara had installed essentially permissive action links on ICBMs. You had to enter in an 8-digit code before you could, that would come from the National Command Authority, before you could launch missiles. And Curtis LeMay, I think it was Curtis, I'm not sure about that. Commander of SAC had directed that the setting on those switches would be 00000000. When McNamara found out about this, it was many years later, fell off his chair. And he said, you know, I don't, and this is, you know, so, sorry?
No, that's just crazy.
Well, right. So the point is that the Strategic Air Command complied with the directive, right? It absolutely complied with the directive. It could not be accused of insubordination. But you can see how it subverts the entire thing. So my point is that it's not just the guys at the top. The guys in the middle who make actual decisions, they actually have to know something about this too. I want to close with what I'm going to call the cynic's view of AI. AI is what you call something that doesn't quite work. It works some of the time, maybe most of the time, not all of the time. You don't understand very well how it works. You can't predict when it won't work. When it doesn't work, you can't tell that it's not working. And when you know it's not working, you can't understand why it didn't work and you don't know how to fix it or make it better. Now, if these characteristics are okay, and they are for many applications of AI, then full speed ahead. That's fine. But if any of these characteristics are not okay in your particular use case, again, there's that focus on the use case, then more caution is advisable. Thank you.